Let your body sink gently into stillness. Let your breath slow, like the wind brushing across a plain untouched for millennia. You are not in the present anymore. Not entirely. Tonight, we walk across a veil. And if you listen closely, truly listen, you might hear the earth begin to whisper. Far to the southeast of Turkey, where the land stretches into golden waves of hill and stone, lies a place most maps once forgot. A plateau, dry, silent, unassuming. At first glance, nothing more than a broken patch of limestone and sunburned weeds, swept by the sighs of Anatolian wind. But beneath that quiet skin of dust, the earth remembers. For thousands upon thousands of years, before the wheel turned, before cities rose, before gods had names or prayers had shape, this place held a secret, a silence so old, so deep, it could only be kept by the earth itself. They called it Göbekli Tepe, which means in the old Turkish tongue, Potbelly Hill, a name that sounds simple, even humorous, as if the hill were a sleepy giant curled beneath a blanket of dust. And perhaps it was, because under that mound lay the oldest temple humanity ever built. Not just older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older even than writing, buried beneath 16 feet of sediment and silence. The stones of Göbekli Tepe had waited through storms and centuries, through empires that would rise and fall without ever knowing what they stood upon. They waited for hands that would uncover them, not to disturb, but to remember. And in the late 20th century, they were found. Or perhaps they allowed themselves to be found, because sometimes stories choose when to be heard. And the stones that knew how to speak had been silent for long enough. When the archaeologists arrived, they didn't know what they were standing on. There were no bones, no walls, no tombs or treasures in the traditional sense. Just fragments. Strange T-shaped stones peeking out from the belly of the hill. Moss-covered, sun-scorched, half-swallowed by time. But the moment the first layer of soil was brushed aside, the spell of Göbekli Tepe began to stir. Because these were not mere rocks. They were monoliths, carved with hands so ancient they might as well have belonged to shadows. And on their surfaces were symbols, animals, shapes, eyes, stories. It is said that before humans learned to write with ink, they wrote with stone. And Göbekli Tepe, in its circular sanctuaries and carved guardians, may be the first library of the human soul. The night sky above this place is heavy with stars, just as it was 12,000 years ago, when firelight flickered across the faces of pillars that rose like spirits in the dark. When someone nameless and long gone, stood in that same silence and whispered into eternity. We don't know what they said, but we can feel it. Tonight, I'll take you deeper into this sacred mystery, into circles of meaning and shadow, into a forgotten world where animals were gods and stones could speak. Close your eyes now, if you wish. The story is only beginning, and the veil is growing thinner. They say the land forgets. That time covers all things with equal hands, cities, bones, memories. But some places are not forgotten. They are intentionally hidden. Tonight, we sink just a little deeper into the Earth's memory. Not far from the modern town of Sanliurfa, a region so ancient its roots seem to curl around the first whispers of civilization. There lies a ridge once thought barren, a quiet rise above the Heron Plain, dry as parchment, empty as a sigh. But before it was barren, before the plows came, before the goats nibbled dry grass, and the shepherds wandered with dust on their sandals, this hill was alive. Let's step back, far back, to a time before the plow had even been dreamed, before the first seed was pushed into soil by human hands, before bread, before pottery, before cities. back to a world of ice retreating, forests expanding, and stars burning with a primal clarity no longer seen by modern eyes. We are standing in the 10th millennium BCE, a time when humankind was still wandering, still surviving, still deeply, intimately tied to the rhythms of the wild. And yet, something was stirring, a yearning, a vision not of shelter or safety, but of meaning. Here, on this very hill, groups of people, hunter-gatherers, not kings or priests, began to carve the impossible into stone. Not crude idols, not simple altars, but towering monoliths arranged in sacred geometry, etched with symbols that seemed to come from dream, not memory. And then they buried them. Yes, that's what confounds archaeologists to this day. Göbekli Tepe wasn't swallowed by erosion or ruined in conquest. It was deliberately entombed, as if the earth were asked to protect something precious. A womb, wrapped in dust. But why? Some believe the answer lies in what came next. Because shortly after the time of Göbekli Tepe, something unprecedented happened. Humans stopped wandering. They began to plant, to build, to stay. And it happened right here in this very region. The first domesticated wheat, einkorn, was born in these hills. The first granaries, the first attempts to tame time by rooting ourselves in place. Was it Göbekli Tepe that inspired that shift? Did these circles of stone, these gathering places of meaning, give rise to agriculture? It is a haunting question because it suggests that we did not settle first to feed our bodies, but to feed our spirits, that it was not necessity, but myth, that birthed civilization. Imagine it. By day, men and women hunting gazelle, gathering bitter roots. By night, they return not to a village, but to a sacred site lit by fire. And there, under a sky thick with stars, they gather in quiet awe, not to eat, but to remember, to speak the names of animals that live in dreams, to honor forces older than language, to carve their reverence in a stone that would outlast every breath. And when their work was done, when the temples had sung their purpose, they did not leave them to crumble. They buried them, like a mother laying her child to rest, not in grief, but in reverence. What if this entire site, the circles, the carvings, the enclosures, was not just a place of ritual, but a turning point in the human soul? A place where the wild heart of the hunter met the rooted vision of the builder, where mythology began to take form not just in story, but in stone. And so the hill grew again, layer by layer, stone by stone, century by silent century, until it became just another mound beneath the Turkish sun, a pasture for sheep, a memory swallowed by time. But the earth remembers. Always. It holds what we forget. And in this place, beneath the fields of dust and grain, it held the first attempt of humanity to speak to the cosmos. Not with words, but with form. You may begin to feel a heaviness behind your eyes now. That soft lull of knowing something ancient, without the need to understand it. Let yourself drift. We have only just begun. Sleep often begins with the ordinary. The gentle repetition of breath, the rustling of leaves outside your window, the quiet hum of things unseen. And sometimes history begins that way too. Not with a grand discovery, but with a shepherd, a man walking his land, unaware that every step he takes is over a buried cathedral of the soul. It was the early 1990s. The air in southeastern Turkey was dry, humming with cicadas and the low bleat of sheep. The hills near Sanliurfa rolled like the backs of sleeping animals, soft, sun-baked, and unremarkable. No signs, no fences, just wind and time. On that day, the shepherd's name has been lost to memory, but what he found would rewrite the story of humankind. As he walked along the southern slope of what locals called Göbekli Tepe, Potbelly Hill, his foot struck something hard. Not rock, not earth, but something with an edge, a buried shape, a resistance. He crouched, dug a little, and beneath a thin crust of dust and grass, he saw the curve of stone. It wasn't natural. It couldn't be. Even then, he likely thought it was just an old grave marker or maybe part of a forgotten village wall. He didn't know that the stone he had touched was older than the wheel, older than the Great Pyramid, older than every written word ever etched into clay or papyrus. He didn't know it had been waiting. The shepherd told someone, who told someone else, and eventually word reached the local museum, and from there to a man who would fall in love with the mystery. Klaus Schmidt, a German archaeologist, patient, meticulous, and profoundly curious. When Schmidt arrived, he saw what others had overlooked. These weren't random stones. They weren't walls. They were pillars, deliberately shaped, purposefully placed, arranged in a pattern that whispered of ceremony, of meaning. He started digging, and what emerged from the hillside was something the world was not ready for. Circular enclosures, some over 50 feet wide. Two central monoliths towering at the heart of each circle, surrounded by others in perfect formation. Carved into their surfaces were animals: foxes, boars, cranes, scorpions, snakes, each rendered with a style and precision that should not have existed in a world without metal, without wheels, without cities. And yet, they were here. The discovery sent a quiet tremor through the world of archaeology. Because Göbekli Tepe didn't just predate every known temple. It challenged everything we thought we knew about the birth of civilization. It suggested that belief came before structure, that myth came before mathematics, that awe came before agriculture. And it all began with a shepherd, a man whose name has faded, but whose step uncovered a sleeping monument of the soul. Think of that tonight as you lie in stillness. How many hills have we walked across, never knowing what sleeps beneath them? How many forgotten truths lie inches beneath our feet? Sometimes history doesn't crash like thunder. Sometimes it stirs like a breath beneath the soil. And all it takes is someone willing to notice. Silence is not always empty. Sometimes it hums. Sometimes it waits. And in the ancient hill of Göbekli Tepe, silence had been waiting for over 12,000 years. Not passively, not forgotten, but like a breath held too long, like a secret with weight. When the archaeologist Klaus Schmidt arrived in the early 1990s, he did not arrive as a conqueror of ruins. He arrived as a listener. You see, some stones must be read like poems, not measured but felt, not cracked open but unfolded. And Schmidt, with his quiet eyes and a heart tuned to ancient rhythm, understood that this hill was not just hiding something old, but something sacred. With each stroke of his trowel, he wasn't uncovering history. He was unburying memory. Layer by layer, the earth gave up its silence. And beneath it, pillars, dozens of them, some towering nearly 20 feet, weighing up to 20 tons, each one carved not just with tools, but with intention. They were arranged in circles, or perhaps more accurately, in sanctuaries, enclosures as scholars would call them, with no roofs and no signs of practical use. No hearths, no homes, only space and presence. At the center of each circle stood two T-shaped monoliths, larger than the rest, not just supports, but figures. And here lies the strange beauty of it all. These stones were not merely structural. They were symbolic, stylized, anthropomorphic, as if each pillar represented a being, a presence, a god perhaps, or an ancestor, or something else, something unnamed. Etched along their surfaces were images. Serpents coiling into eternity. Boars in mid-charge. Foxes curling with strange familiarity. Scorpions, vultures, lions. Not just animals, but icons. Symbols too ancient to be translated with certainty. Too vivid to be dismissed. Archaeologists would later call this iconography without text. But it is more than that. It is language without language. A form of communication so primal that it bypasses the mind and goes straight to the soul. And all of this complexity, this vision, this staggering artistry, came not from a settled people, not from farmers or kings, but from hunter-gatherers. They had no cities, no written records, no domesticated animals, no grain to store, no bureaucracies to feed. And yet, they built Göbekli Tepe. It was unthinkable, a heresy against everything the textbooks had whispered for over a century. Before this, it was widely believed that spiritual life emerged only after humans settled, that temples came after agriculture, after social organization, after scarcity led to surplus. But Göbekli Tepe flipped the timeline. Here stood proof that belief may have come first. That myth was the seed, that humans gathered not just to survive, but to make meaning. Schmidt once said that he felt, from the moment he arrived, that this was not a place of dwelling, but of gathering, of ritual, and perhaps of transcendence. But what was the ritual? Who were they worshiping? Were these temples to gods, or mirrors for the soul? No one knows. Not truly. Not yet. Because Göbekli Tepe does not answer. It invites. It stands in silence, offering symbols instead of explanations, circles instead of hierarchies. And as Schmidt and his team dug deeper, they realized something even more astonishing. The oldest enclosures, those buried deepest, were also the most sophisticated. The more you went back in time, the more refined the architecture. The carvings were clearer, the designs more precise. It was as if humanity had not evolved toward this vision, but had begun with it, and then forgotten. Can you feel that? The gentle dissonance? That quiet unraveling of what we thought we knew? Perhaps this is why Göbekli Tepe is so haunting, because it suggests that we are not progressing in a straight line, but circling back to something we've lost, as if the story of humanity isn't a ladder, but a spiral, and somewhere in that spiral, Göbekli Tepe sings, not with sound, but with form, not with logic, but with longing. So tonight, as you settle deeper into the hush of the hour, imagine you're there, kneeling beside one of those ancient stones, the air still, the night sky so full of stars it presses down like velvet, and beneath your hands, the cold breath of limestone, carved by someone long gone, who once believed that in shaping stone, they were shaping something divine. Let sleep come now. We will go deeper still. The next layer awaits. There's something eternal about a circle. No beginning, no end, no corner to hide in, no edge to fall from. Just movement and return, a rhythm of presence. When we speak of Göbekli Tepe, we speak not of walls or ruins, but of circles carved into stone and memory. Sacred spaces that do not keep things out, but draw something in. Tonight, let us step into one of these circles. Close your eyes. You are standing on a sun-bleached plateau, the wind brushing softly against your skin. There is no sound but the hush of your own breath and the occasional cry of a distant bird. Before you, the earth parts, revealing a perfect circle of standing stones. You descend slowly down into the hollowed earth. And there it is, a sanctuary beneath the open sky. Unlike the temples we know, sealed with ceilings shadowed in mystery. Göbekli Tepe opens upward, always upward. No roof, no covering. Only sky. Some believe that was the point, that these stone enclosures were meant to frame the heavens, not as shelters, but as portals. Imagine the night sky 12,000 years ago. No artificial light, no cities, no screens, just stars, countless, blazing, timeless. Imagine standing in the center of one of these sacred rings, beneath Orion's belt, beneath the arc of the Milky Way, your feet rooted in limestone, your soul pulled toward the stars. The circles vary in size, some vast, some intimate, but all are carefully arranged. Stone walls curved into perfect arcs, and within them, the pillars. Tall, silent, unshakable, two in the center, always, facing one another like sentinels locked in eternal witness. Surrounding them, smaller T-shaped stones rise along the circle's edge, forming a kind of perimeter. But this was no prison. This was a gathering, a wheel of presence. Each stone bears marks, some with animals etched in low relief, others worn smooth, as if time itself came to rest against their skin. We did not know what they meant, these circles, but we can feel what they do. They hold space. They hold attention. They are not random. They are aligned. Some scholars believe the enclosures point towards celestial events. Solstices, star risings, the dance of the sky itself. And perhaps that is true. Perhaps these people, who had no writing, no calendars, nonetheless mapped the stars with stone, not to control them, but to honor them. And within that circle, ritual, not the kind we understand. There are no altars in the modern sense, no statues of deities, no written prayers, just space and form and presence. And yet, you can almost hear it. The sound of footsteps circling clockwise, the breath of 100 voices humming in reverence, the low crackle of fire, the smell of ash, of hide, of blood perhaps, or incense, or wild herbs pressed to flame. The ground beneath you is limestone, soft and chalky. You can feel the weight of the stones around you, not as threat, but as memory. It is said that when we gather in circles, we remember we are equals. There is no throne in Göbekli Tepe, no seat of power, only a shared center. And maybe that is the message. Maybe beneath the stars, they gathered not to serve a god, but to stand with one another, to align themselves with something greater, not higher, but deeper. Because circles are not just for looking up. They are for turning inward, for reflection, for connection. And maybe, just maybe, these stone sanctuaries were places of deep dreaming, where myths were not told, but felt, where the veil between waking and spirit thinned, where the hunters became seekers, where the wild became sacred. Tonight, as you rest, let the circle hold you, not to enclose you, but to remind you that even in the vastness of time, you're not lost. You are part of the pattern. Breathe. The sky is still above you. The stones are still listening, and the story is far from over. Not all silence is empty. Some of it stands. Stone has always held a strange power over us. It is the material of permanence, the skin of the earth made into memory. And at Göbekli Tepe, stone is no longer just matter. It becomes presence. Tonight, we return to the heart of the circle, to those monoliths that rise like beings from the soil. Tall, smooth, silent. They do not crumble. They watch. The T-shaped pillars of Göbekli Tepe are not just supports. They are figures. That much is clear, even without faces. They stand upright, broad shoulders sloping, like silhouettes of ancient beings caught mid-thought. On many of them, you'll see arms, carved in low relief, folded gently across their bodies, hands resting on their bellies as if in reverent calm. No eyes, no mouths, no voice, and yet they speak. To stand before them is to feel watched, not judged, not threatened, but seen, as if the pillars were once people, or spirits, or gods so ancient that they've forgotten their own names. The archaeologists call them anthropomorphic, human-like, but that word feels too clinical, too hollow. These are not depictions. They are embodiments. Some believe they represent shamans, midway between human and divine. Others say ancestors, preserved not in bones, but in stone. And some whisper that they are gods, not like the thunder wielders of Olympus or the golden rulers of Egypt, but gods of a time before names, before myth took form. Maybe they are all of these things, maybe none, but one truth lingers, quiet and heavy as dusk. These pillars were meant to endure, not as decoration, but as presences. If you close your eyes, you might feel their stillness settle into your chest. That kind of stillness that doesn't come from lack, but from knowing, from being. Some of the pillars have belts carved around their middles, stone hands tucked beneath them, decorated with foxes, serpents, birds. Were these totems? Symbols of rank? Or were they telling a story? A silent biography etched into eternal skin? In one enclosure, Enclosure D, the two central pillars stand like twins, taller than all the rest. Between them, a space not quite wide enough to walk through, but just enough to suggest movement, as if something once passed between them. A spirit, a soul, a vision. One pillar shows a fox slinking down its side. Another, an H-shaped symbol near the neck. Its meaning unknown, but persistent. They have no faces, but their forms are complete. They have no voices, but they are remembered. Isn't that the paradox of Göbekli Tepe? That these stone beings, lifeless by all material standards, seem more alive than much of what we see in daylight. They do not move, but they linger. They wait. They ask questions not in language, but in presence. What is it to be remembered? What is it to be? And who were these beings that the ancient ones carved, lifted, and arranged in sacred circles beneath the stars? Were they ancestors made immortal in stone? Were they archetypes, the first great dreamers, the first mourners, the first poets? Or were they something stranger still? Maybe these figures aren't meant to tell us who they were. Maybe they are mirrors, asking us who we are. You can feel it now, can't you? That gravity, that hush. It presses gently on your thoughts like a blanket at dusk. Let it. There is something beautiful in this silence. Something older than language. Something that stirs not in your mind, but in your bones. The pillars are still there, still standing, as they have stood for 12,000 years. Unmoving, unshaken, alive in a way we no longer understand. Sleep now, if you wish, or drift just a little longer, because in the next breath, we will begin to read the stories they carry, not with our eyes, but with our wonder. There are languages older than words, languages that never learned how to shout, but instead whisper, and Göbekli Tepe is written in such a language. Tonight we come closer, not to translate, but to listen. Breathe slowly. Feel the quiet settling over you like a soft blanket. Now, picture your hand gently brushing across a stone surface, smooth and cold beneath your fingertips. Your touch finds a curve, not accidental, but intentional. A line carved with thought, with reverence, with memory. You're not tracing cracks or erosion. You are reading a story. The carvings of Göbekli Tepe are not chaotic. They are meticulous. They are not decorative. They are deliberate. All across the surfaces of the towering T-shaped pillars, you find them. Animals, symbols, lines that breathe like fossilized dreams. A fox mid-stride, its body stretched, elongated, moving with an elegance that defies the stone. It walks along the flank of a pillar, its meaning unknown, its presence undeniable. Foxes appear again and again at Göbekli Tepe. Was the fox a guide between worlds? A trickster? A protector? No one knows. But the repetition, it means something. In another place, you find a vulture, its wings unfurled as if in flight. Below it, a sphere, perhaps the sun, perhaps a soul. Some believe these birds of death were also birds of transition, carriers of the spirit from earth to sky, not feared but honored. Then there are snakes, long, winding, coiling across the pillars like ancient sentences. In one image, 3 snakes descend side by side, not haphazard, not random, like a mantra in stone. And the scorpions, sharp-tailed, defensive, clinging to the base of sacred enclosures. Guardians, perhaps, symbols of death, or of transformation. Each carving feels like a thought paused in eternity. Each image chosen, placed, positioned with an intention we can no longer name. And it's not just animals. There are geometric shapes, H-like symbols, crescents, circles, nested enclosures. Are they constellations? Calendars? Portals to myths that have no words. One of the most mysterious images is the so-called vulture stone. Pillar 43. Its surface is a dreamscape of symbols. Vultures, scorpions, a headless human figure. An orb, a strange grid. Some say it is a map of the sky, a star chart from 10,000 BC. Others believe it marks a great catastrophe, a comet strike remembered in myth and carved into memory. But perhaps it is none of these things. Perhaps it is all. You see, Göbekli Tepe doesn't tell us its secrets. It remembers them. And memory is not always linear. It's not always logical. It's layered, like dream, like ritual, like myth. In many traditions, before there was language, there was symbol. The human need to mark meaning on cave walls, on skin, on stone. Long before we learned how to explain. Göbekli Tepe is not a text. It is a song frozen in time. One that does not demand understanding, but invites presence. So perhaps these carvings are not meant to be solved like a riddle. Perhaps they are meant to be felt, like the echo of a forgotten truth stirring in your chest. Have you ever dreamed in images, only to wake with a feeling instead of a memory? That is the language of Göbekli Tepe. It does not speak in answers. It speaks in feeling. Imagine the people who carve these images, stone tools in hand, firelight flickering across their faces, the night filled with stars and breath. They did not build for function. They built for meaning. And meaning is what lingers. You are part of that now, just by listening. The stones speak, even in silence, especially in silence. Let that language wrap around you like night air. Let it hum beneath your skin. Let the fox walk beside you. Let the vulture lift you. Let the serpent coil softly through your thoughts. And as sleep begins to stir, remember this. Some stories do not live in books. They live in stone. And some truths do not ask to be solved, only held. Before thrones, before temples, before names carved in marble, there was the animal. And before we worshiped gods in human form, we worshiped the creatures that moved through our world like shadows with souls. Tonight, let's drift softly back into that older reverence, that primal knowing, to a time when animals were not symbols of divinity. They were divinity. And nowhere does that ancient vision whisper louder than at Göbekli Tepe. Close your eyes. Imagine the circle again, stone rising around you like a frozen chant. Now, see the carvings not as art, but as presence. A fox, thin and clever, etched into a pillar. Its tail curls with silent motion. Not just a depiction, but a guardian. The fox was not admired for its beauty, but for its knowing, its stealth, its magic. It was said that foxes moved between realms, between dusk and dark, life and mystery. Some called them messengers. Others, protectors of secrets. At Göbekli Tepe, the fox is everywhere. Then, the serpent, long, winding, always descending. In many traditions, the snake is a paradox, a destroyer and a healer, a symbol of death and rebirth. To see a serpent in stone is to feel a ripple of unease, but also something deeper, an invitation to shed, to transform, to awaken. And then the vulture, high upon the pillars, wings spread like a curtain of dusk. To us, the vulture is a scavenger, but to ancient people, it was divine, a skyborn being that did what no human could, carry the soul into the heavens. In the mythology of ancient Egypt, the vulture was a sacred mother. In Anatolia, perhaps the same, not a bringer of death, but a guide beyond it. And there are others. Boars, symbols of strength, defiance. Scorpions, guardians of thresholds, venomous sentries. Cranes, elegant, eternal, often seen as carriers of spirit across water and sky. These are not just images. They were presences in the circle, alive in stone, breathing in myth. Imagine the people who came here, cloaked in animal skins, faces painted with ash or ochre, voices chanting beneath stars. They didn't pray to gods with human faces. They prayed to what they knew, to the wild, to the instincts that kept them alive, to the animals that taught them how to move, how to fear, how to survive. They didn't see themselves as separate. They saw themselves as woven into a greater spirit. And that spirit had claws, wings, tusks, fangs. It walked on four legs. It flew. It hissed. So these animals weren't just decoration. They were invited into the temple, carved with devotion, set into sacred places with ritual precision, not as lesser beings, but as gods, or maybe something even more mysterious, as mirrors of human truth. In Jungian thought, the animal is the symbol of the unconscious, the primal, the instinctive. At Göbekli Tepe, that instinct is not denied. It is enshrined. The temple does not reject the animal. It is built for it. And maybe that's the deepest lesson. That before we tried to conquer the natural world, we bowed to it, not with fear, but with reverence. What if we were never meant to rise above the animal, but to walk beside it, to listen, to learn, to remember that the divine speaks in growls and cries in flight. Even now, you can feel them around you. The rustle of wings above the circle, the soft footfall of the fox behind your thoughts, the cold coil of the serpent whispering through memory. They are not gone. They are not symbols. They are living myths. And they're speaking still, in your dreams, in your fears, in your wonder. Let them. Let their presence lull you into rest. Let their breath curl beside yours. Because in the world of Göbekli Tepe, animals were gods, and the gods never left. Ritual is older than language, older than prayer, even. It begins in silence, in gesture, in the trembling space between fear and awe. And Göbekli Tepe was built in that space. Tonight, as the stars begin to rise behind your eyes, we descend deeper, not into darkness, but into intention. We've spoken of the pillars, of the circle, of the animals carved in stillness. But what happened here? What was done? Again and again, under moonlight and sky, because the stones suggest something more than architecture, more than art. They suggest offering. An offering is never without sacrifice. Within the enclosures of Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists have found strange details. Shallow basins, carefully carved into the limestone floors, just deep enough to hold something. Not for grain, not for water. These were not tools of survival. They were instruments of ceremony. Some believe they were altars, others collection pools. For blood, the bones found scattered near the site, deer, boar, gazelle, are cracked in a particular way, split to extract the marrow. Ritual feasting, perhaps, or offering. In the absence of human burials, it speaks volumes. This was no cemetery. It was a place for the living to meet the invisible. But why blood? In nearly every ancient culture, blood was more than fluid. It was life, the breath of the body made visible. To spill blood upon sacred stone was not an act of violence, but of intimacy, a giving back, a nourishing of the unseen. Perhaps at Göbekli Tepe, the foxes and vultures etched in stone were not only revered, but fed. The act of carving the animal into the pillar, then offering its physical counterpart in ritual, creates a bridge between image and essence, between symbol and spirit. Imagine it, a procession before dawn, figures cloaked in hide and shadow, carrying the body of a deer, its eyes still bright with the stars of the night. They descend into the circle, where fire flickers against carved stone. There is no speech, only motion, a cut, a basin filled, not in horror, but in reverence, not for cruelty, for connection. And when it is done, the blood seeps into the limestone, into the ancient earth, into memory, and perhaps into the gaze of the silent pillars. There are no gods here, not in the modern sense. No golden thrones, no commands, only the presence of the sacred, the recognition that life, to be honored, must sometimes be given. This idea is not unique to Göbekli Tepe. It echoes through the temples of the Maya, the rites of Vedic fire altars, the sacrifices whispered about in Greek shadows. But here it is pure, untangled from empire or scripture. It is raw, primordial, a direct line from human hand to mythic truth. Because blood is not just about death, it is about exchange, a covenant between body and spirit, between the hunter and the hunted, between the human and the divine. And maybe that is why Göbekli Tepe was built, not as a monument, but as a meeting place, a space where offerings could be made, not out of fear, but from the aching need to belong, to something greater, a way to say, we remember you, we are still part of the story. We give what we can, so we do not forget who we are. So tonight, as you lie beneath your own sky, let this knowledge soften in your chest, that once long ago, human hands carved stone not to control, but to commune. That once, under stars identical to yours, someone knelt before a pillar and offered life, not for power, but for presence. The basins are dry now, the flames are gone, but the memory remains, not in the blood itself, but in the stone that still breathes beside it. Let sleep carry you now. We have more to uncover, and the circle is only just beginning to open. Some truths arrive like thunder. Others drift in slowly, like fog over ancient hills, unsettling what we thought we knew. And perhaps the greatest mystery of Göbekli Tepe is not how it was built, but when. Because this temple, this sacred site of unimaginable age, was not constructed by a people who farmed the land, but by those who still wandered it. Let that settle in your chest for a moment. The oldest known temple in the world was built before the invention of agriculture. The first seeds were not yet planted. The first villages not yet formed. There were no wheat fields swaying under sun. No granaries, no irrigation, no settled homes with walls to protect. And yet, there was a temple, and not a simple shrine, but a monumental complex of enclosures, with sculpted pillars and symbolic art, and stonework that required not just hands, but vision. Let us walk through that mystery together, slowly. The people of Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers. They followed herds across the plains. They lived in mobile bands, collecting fruits, nuts, roots, tracking wild game through forest and steppe. Their world was not fixed. It moved with the seasons, with the stars, with need, and yet, in the midst of that impermanence, they gathered and they built together. They shaped 20-ton stones, hauled them across distances without the wheel, lifted them into place using only the strength of community and belief. And they did it again and again, over centuries. This is not the behavior of people clinging to survival. This is the behavior of people searching for meaning. It defies the old narrative. For so long, scholars believed that once humans began to farm, they had time to dream, to worship, to build. The temple, we thought, came after the field. But Göbekli Tepe tells a different story, one where the sacred came first, where myth was not born of surplus, but yearning. Some archaeologists now suggest that this very act of gathering to build something sacred, of coming together again and again around shared symbols, may have laid the foundation for agriculture itself. That perhaps we didn't settle because we discovered farming. We discovered farming because we wanted to stay near something we believed in, near the sacred, near the circle, near the stone. Imagine it, season after season, bands of people returning to this plateau, bringing with them stories, animals, offerings, dreams, and perhaps, over time, they began to plant, not as farmers, but as pilgrims who wished to feed the sacred, to remain, to tend, to anchor their lives in something that did not move. And so, the myth that agriculture led to culture begins to crumble. Maybe it was culture, ritual, meaning, story, that led to agriculture. This changes everything, because it suggests that the first seed ever planted was not for survival, but for belonging. It suggests that before we built walls to keep the world out, we built circles to let the mystery in. And perhaps that's what Göbekli Tepe was. Not a temple in the modern sense, but a womb where something deeper than civilization was born. Not just farming, but remembering that we are not just bodies that eat and breathe, but beings that long for connection, for wonder, for the sky above and the stone below to mean something more than just shelter. Tonight, you lie on your own foundation, your bed, your home, your world, and around you spin the same stars they watched, the same darkness, the same unanswerable questions. Göbekli Tepe reminds us that those questions came first, that before we needed bread, we needed mystery, and in that mystery, we found each other. Let that be your final breath before sleep tonight. We did not build the sacred from what we had. We built what we had because we first knew the sacred. There are places in this world where time does not behave, where it folds in on itself like mist, where past and present sit side by side, and the soul feels older than the body that holds it. Göbekli Tepe is such a place. Tonight, we don't move forward. We move inward. We listen, not for facts or conclusions, but for the echoes that hum beneath the surface of things. Because sometimes what a place is can only be understood through what it feels like. And Göbekli Tepe feels like the dream time in the cosmology of indigenous Australians. The dream time is not the past. It is a sacred layer of reality, ever present, ever breathing, a space where the ancestors walked, where creation still unfolds, where stories are not remembered, but lived. They say that in the dream time, everything was spoken into existence by song. The land, the rivers, the sky, all shaped by spirit beings moving across the landscape, singing the world awake. Now imagine standing at Göbekli Tepe, the stone beneath your feet cold with age, the circles open to the sky, the wind moving through the pillars like breath. You are surrounded by images, animals, forms, symbols. not in sequence, but in rhythm, not narrative, but mythic presence. The dream time isn't just remembered. It is activated again and again, by ritual, by place, by stillness. And Göbekli Tepe feels eerily similar. Not a relic, but a portal, a space outside of ordinary time, where the invisible becomes briefly visible, where reality thins like silk stretched too far. There are no clocks in the dream time, no calendars, only movement and meaning. And at Göbekli Tepe, there are no straight lines, no written rules, only circles, only symbols, only the hush of a different kind of time, a different kind of truth. In many shamanic traditions, whether Siberian, Amazonian, or Aboriginal, there's a recurring belief. That time is not something we walk through, but something we return to, and maybe that's what Göbekli Tepe was. A returning place, a point on the landscape, not a geography, but of spirit, a place where people came not to learn something new, but to remember what they already knew, beneath the surface of their waking minds. Perhaps each carved animal wasn't just a symbol, but a being still alive in that dreaming layer. Each circle, a story made of stone. Even the way Göbekli Tepe was used suggests this. There were no dwellings nearby. People didn't live here. They came, offered, remembered, and left. They came as visitors, pilgrims not just across the land, but across dimensions. The ceremonies they held, the blood in the basins, the fires in the center, the chanting between stone guardians, may not have been for the gods at all. They may have been for alignment, with the dreaming, with a layer of reality where story creates matter. And in this way, Göbekli Tepe becomes less a temple and more a threshold, like the sacred sites of the world's oldest traditions. Uluru in Australia, Chavin in the Andes, Stonehenge in the Foggy Isles. It speaks not with the voice of empires, but with the breath of origin. It whispers, the world is not just what you see. It is also what you remember without knowing why. And so, as you lie back now, your body softening into rest, know this, you're not far from the dream time, because every night, as your thoughts grow quiet and your breath slows, you too step beyond the boundaries of the waking world. You return to symbols, to memory, to something that does not follow the clock. And maybe, just maybe, the people of Göbekli Tepe once stood where you are now, on the edge of waking and sleep, between story and silence. They did not write it down. They carved it and buried it, not to hide it, but to preserve it for a future that might remember how to listen. Listen, the dream time still breathes, and the stones still sing. Some absences speak louder than presence. A door left ajar, a chair no longer warm, a fire turned to ash with no footprints leading away. And at Göbekli Tepe, the most haunting question is not who built it, but why they left. Tonight, we lean gently into that silence, not to fill it, but to honor it. Because what makes Göbekli Tepe so mysterious is not just what was found, but what was not. No tools scattered in haste. No collapsed structures showing signs of struggle or ruin. No evidence of invasion, of disaster, of loss. Instead, an almost tender burial, a deliberate act of closing. The entire site, once vibrant with carving and ceremony, was filled in, layer after layer of earth, stone, and debris, as if tucked into the earth. Like a sleeping child, this wasn't destruction. It was preservation, a kind of farewell. But why? Why would a people devote centuries, across generations, to building the most sophisticated spiritual complex of the ancient world, only to bury it? Who were these builders, so organized in their vision, so capable in their craft, yet so invisible to the world they left behind? They left no cities, No cemeteries, no written language, no DNA we can trace with certainty. They move through time like smoke, seen briefly in the shape of their monuments, then gone. And here's the most chilling part. After Göbekli Tepe was buried, they disappeared, not just from that site, but seemingly from the map of human memory, as if their purpose had been fulfilled, and their time had ended. Some scholars suggest that climate change drove them away, a shift in rainfall, a fading of the wild game they relied upon. Others believe the burden of maintenance became too great, that the effort to gather, to carve, to carry could no longer be sustained. But perhaps the answer lies not in hardship, but in completion. Maybe the builders didn't vanish out of crisis, but out of ritual. Maybe Göbekli Tepe was not a place to live, but a cosmic task handed down across lifetimes. And when it was done, when the final circle was raised, the last carving finished, they returned to the wild from which they came. Their story told, their offering given. There is something beautifully human in that. To build something not for power, not for legacy, but for meaning. To craft with care, to carve with reverence, and then to walk away. We are not used to such endings. We seek closure, answers, epilogues, but the builders of Göbekli Tepe left us none. Only circles, only silence, only stone, still standing, still asking. Who were they? We do not know their names. We cannot know their faces, but we can feel their presence, etched into every fox, every vulture, every serpent that curls across the surface of their memory. They were storytellers without words, architects of mystery, guardians of something we have not yet remembered, and maybe they still exist, not in bones or ruins, but in the instinct that draws us to gather, to create, to make symbols of the things we cannot speak, because the same impulse lives in you, in your longing for wonder, in your ache for what has no name, in your quiet, sleepless questions about why you're here, and who you've always been. So rest now beneath their sky. Let your breath slow with theirs. You're not alone. You are walking the same spiral they once walked, between dream and waking, between meaning and mystery. They did not disappear. They became part of the land, and tonight, you walk beside them. Some temples are built for the gods, others for the people, but a few are built for the stars. Tonight, as your thoughts begin to drift, let's lift our eyes upward, as those ancient builders once did, and wonder what they saw and why they built toward it. Because Göbekli Tepe is not only a circle of stones. It is a compass, a celestial calendar, a whispered alignment between earth and sky. At first glance, it may seem accidental. Stone circles, T-shaped pillars, a gathering space open to the stars. But nothing at Göbekli Tepe is random. Each enclosure is turned in a particular direction. Each pillar positioned with careful regard, not toward rivers or mountains, but toward the heavens. Many believe these circles were oriented to astronomical events, the rising of certain stars, the turning of the solstice, the appearance of celestial markers that once guided hunter-gatherers not just through land, but through meaning. Imagine standing in the center of Enclosure D, long before cities, before clocks, before names for constellations. The night above you is unimaginably vast. No light pollution, no barrier between your skin and the stars. The Milky Way spills like silver dust across the black, and rising on the horizon, bright, steady, a star, not just any star, Sirius, the dog star, the brightest in our sky. Some scholars believe that Göbekli Tepe's enclosures were built to mark its appearance, that the temple itself may have been a kind of observatory, not to control the stars, but to witness them. And there is more. the carvings on the pillars, foxes, scorpions, vultures, have drawn the attention of archaeoastronomers, those who study how ancient people read the sky. One theory suggests that the vulture stone, Pillar 43, is not just myth, but a star map. The circular symbols may represent celestial bodies. The scorpion, the constellation Scorpius, the bird with a round shape above it, perhaps the sun or the soul. And perhaps in that card arrangement, there lies a memory of a sky now gone, a moment frozen not in ink, but in stone. Some researchers propose that a great celestial event, a comet strike perhaps, was encoded into that pillar, an echo of a trauma so vast, so sacred, that it was carved for all time. But even if we set these theories aside, the fact remains, the builders of Göbekli Tepe were watchers of the sky. And why wouldn't they be? The sky was their storybook, their clock, their map. They followed the seasons by starlight. They read the rhythms of life in the moon's glow, in the sun's slow return to its winter throne. And they looked up not with calculation, but with awe. And that awe, that desire to place oneself in harmony with the cosmos, may be the truest form of religion. What if Göbekli Tepe wasn't built to call the gods down, but to lift human beings up into alignment with the stars? What if each ceremony, each offering, each fire lit beneath those massive pillars was not just an act of devotion, but a conversation between stone and starlight, between the blood of the earth and the brilliance of the sky? Tonight, as your body softens and the stillness gathers around you, you too are part of that alignment. The stars they watched, Orion, Sirius, the pole star, still shine above your roof, still rise and fall in the rhythms they once sang by. You're not so far away. Close your eyes, breathe in the dark, and feel it, the pulse of time stretching outward, not as a line, but as a circle, a temple without walls, a sky with no ceiling, a place where myth meets mathematics, and wonder becomes direction. They did not draw maps in ink. They carved them into the bones of the earth, so that we might one day remember, not just how to live, but where we belong. Above us, the stars still move, and below, the stones still point. The dialogue continues, even in sleep. Long before Zeus raised his lightning, before Ra sailed his golden bark across the sky, before Vishnu dreamed the world from the coils of time, there were gods whose names we no longer know, gods without temples of marble, gods without scriptures or statues, gods that have been forgotten, except by the stone. Tonight, let us wander into their silence, into Göbekli Tepe, that place without names, but filled with presence, because the pillars of Göbekli Tepe feel like gods, not the anthropomorphic deities of later myths, not kings in disguise or jealous beings demanding praise, but something older, more primal, more woven into the bones of the world. They do not look like us, and perhaps that is the point. These T-shaped monoliths, smooth and faceless, stand with arms across their bellies, as if guarding the center of something invisible. They are not statues. They are beings. It is said in many mythologies, Sumerian, Akkadian, Vedic, even Greek, that the earliest gods were not men and women in divine form, but forces, personified skies, mountains with souls, waters that remembered, and the oldest of them were often not human at all. They were serpents, birds, trees, foxes, stone. So what if these pillars, these mute sentinels of Göbekli Tepe, were meant not to represent gods, but to embody them? Not idols, not metaphors, but manifestations. Some scholars have wondered if these beings were the first pantheon, not the Olympians or the Anunnaki, but an older, formless congregation of sacred presences, not the gods who ruled over us, but the gods we stood among. Perhaps they were not called upon for favor, but simply witnessed as reminders of the invisible patterns that held the world together. Even the layout of the enclosures hints at this. In Enclosure D, the two central pillars stand like twin deities, towering above the others, facing each other like ancient lovers, or perhaps like opposites in balance. Day and night, life and death, memory and forgetting. They do not speak, but they hold space, and around them, in a surrounding circle, the other pillars stand, smaller, quieter, as if in observance, as if in orbit. The very geometry of Göbekli Tepe is cosmic, like a solar system, like a gathering of divine essences arranged not by hierarchy, but by resonance. And then there are the carvings. The serpent, the fox, the vulture. In other times and places, these creatures were sacred. In Egypt, the jackal-headed Anubis. In Mesopotamia, the lion-headed Lamassu. In India, the Nagas, serpents of wisdom and power. We call them mythological beings now, but perhaps they were once companions, living symbols of the sacred. So who were the gods of Göbekli Tepe? Were they ancestors deified by memory? Were they spirit animals made stone? Were they echoes of dreams shared across generations, until they took shape in limestone and silence? Or were they something we no longer have a word for? A category of sacred that does not fit into religion or reason. Maybe the gods of Göbekli Tepe were not above us, but within us. The part of us that longs for the stars, that fears the dark, that kneels before a fox and whispers thanks, that watches a vulture turn in the sky and thinks not of death, but of flight. Tonight, you are not asked to believe, only to remember, to let your imagination drift into the stillness between the stones and feel what the builders may have felt. A presence, not loud, not clear, but there, always there. And if you breathe deeply, you might feel them still. The forgotten gods of the East, not banished, not erased, only sleeping, waiting as stone does, as memory does, as myth does. And in your dream tonight, they may return, not in form, but in feeling, because no god, once honored in silence, is ever truly gone. Not all presence is visible. Some of it lingers between the stones, in the curves that were never carved, in the silence that speaks only to those who lean in. Softly, tonight, we walk into that silence, because amid the towering T-shaped monoliths of Göbekli Tepe, all arms folded and forms upright, there is something conspicuously absent. The feminine, or is she simply hidden? At first glance, the sight feels undeniably masculine. The pillars are broad and angular, their carvings sharp and forceful. The dominant symbols, foxes, boars, serpents, speak in a language of movement, danger, power. There are no carved breasts, no wombs, no overt fertility icons, no Venus figurines like those found in caves across Paleolithic Europe. But sometimes the most sacred is not what stands in the center, but what surrounds it. And in that space around the visible, she breathes. In many ancient traditions, the feminine was not always embodied. She was space itself. She was the void into which creation poured, the sacred earth, the receptive sky, the cave that birthed both mystery and memory. And so it's possible that at Göbekli Tepe, the feminine wasn't missing. She was everywhere, not in the pillars, but in the circles that hold them, the enclosures around, not square, not rectangular, but gently curving, womb-like, protective, enclosing a center that remains open to the heavens. That circular shape, repeated across the site, evokes ancient notions of a sacred feminine, the cycle of the moon, the turning of seasons, the endless circle of life and return. In mythology across the world, from a Navajo spider woman to the Egyptian nut, from Gaia to Shakti to the Sumerian Ninhursag, the feminine is not always personified. She is felt. She is the background upon which the stars appear, the field in which the seed is sown, the breath before the word. And perhaps Göbekli Tepe honors her in this way, not with image, but with architecture. Even the act of burying the temple can be seen through a feminine lens, to cover something in earth, to return it to the soil, to place sacred memory back into the body of the world. It mirrors ancient rites of burial, of gestation, of transformation. It was not an ending. It was a folding in, a return to source. And let us remember, absence is not negation. It is invitation. When we cannot see her, we must feel her. When she is not named, we must listen deeper. Maybe the feminine presence at Göbekli Tepe is not a goddess carved in a stone, but the space between the stones, the curve of the enclosure, the hush that holds the ceremony. In a vast sweep of myth and time, the feminine often retreats beneath the surface. She is the well beneath the desert, the root beneath the tree, the stillness beneath the fire. And when the world forgets to honor her, she does not rage. She waits, not for worship, but for recognition. So tonight, as you lie in stillness, let her return to you, not as a figure with a name, but as a presence, warm, vast, formless, and eternal. Feel the curve of the night around your body, the quiet that receives your breath without judgment, the dark that is not empty, but full of potential. This too is her temple, and you are within it, not alone, but held. Some symbols slither through time, leaving no footprints, only feeling. They arrive not with certainty, but with a shiver, and none more than the serpent. Tonight, we lower ourselves beneath the dry breath of Göbekli Tepe and follow the winding trail of something ancient, something primal, something alive in stone and in the human psyche, because across the weathered surfaces of these monoliths, the serpent returns, again and again, coiling, descending, watching, sometimes alone, sometimes in threes, sometimes with heads raised, as if whispering secrets into the ears of the dead. To some, it's simply decorative, a reptile rendered in limestone. But to those who feel, to those who remember that symbols are not created, but summoned, the serpent means far more. It is one of the oldest images known to human consciousness, older than language, older than gods with faces. It is there in the caves of Chauvet, in the myths of the Hopi, in the Ouroboros of the Greeks, eternally swallowing its own tail. And it is here, in the dust of Anatolia, curled against the stone skin of Göbekli Tepe's pillars, as if listening for a time that never ended. What did it mean to the builders? We cannot ask them, but we can ask the serpent, because the serpent has always meant many things at once. In Mesopotamia, it was Ninja Zida, lord of the underworld, keeper of secrets. In Egypt, it was Wadjet, the protector of kings. In India, it was Kundalini, a coil of spiritual energy, sleeping at the base of the spine, waiting to rise. In the Genesis myth, it becomes the tempter, the knowledge bearer. But even then, it is not purely evil. It is awakening. The serpent is change, rebirth, shedding the skin, returning again, different but the same. And that, perhaps, is what makes it so powerful. It moves through categories. It refuses to be one thing. It glides across boundaries between earth and spirit, danger and wisdom, life and death. At Göbekli Tepe, the serpent isn't hidden. It's carved boldly, visibly, claimed. This is no accident. Perhaps these people, who hunted with flint, who saw the world not in fragments, but in cycles, understood something we've forgotten. That transformation is sacred. That fear is a doorway. That wisdom is not always gentle, but is always true. And maybe these serpents, etched with purpose in a sacred stone, were guardians of knowledge, of thresholds, of memory itself. They may have curled around the base of the central pillars, protecting what could not be named. They may have marked the liminal, the passage between the outer world and the inner fire, between the seen and the dreamed. Or perhaps they were simply present, as they always are. Even now, in modern myths, we flinch at snakes. We associate them with danger, betrayal, poison. But deep down, beneath that fear, we recognize them, not as monsters, but as mirrors, because we too shed skin, we too transform, and we too hold knowledge that frightens us. Tonight, let the serpent come close. Let its body wind gently through the grass of your thoughts, its tongue flicking toward the scent of memory. Do not fear it. It brings not death, but the death of what no longer serves you. It brings not chaos, but a reminder that nothing stays the same. And that change, though it may sting, is a form of grace. In the world of Göbekli Tepe, the serpent was not banished. It was carved into the very architecture of meaning. It was honored. Let that teach us something. Let it guide your dreams tonight, downward, inward, into the cool spiral of your own becoming. There are serpents beneath the sand, coiled in the folds of time, waiting not to strike, but to wake. And you are ready. We are used to endings wrapped in fire, in collapse, in the silence of ruin. Temples fall, statues crack, time takes what it pleases. But not here, not at Göbekli Tepe. Here, the end did not come through violence or decay, but through love. Tonight, we kneel beside the most mysterious act of all. Not the building, but the burying. Yes, this sacred site, these circles of meaning carved with impossible care, were not lost to time. They were intentionally entombed, buried, not by wind, not by war, but by the very hands that once raised them, layer upon layer. Stones were gently filled in with debris, earth, tools, broken bones, as if tucking a sacred memory into the womb of the world. A farewell, a closure, a sacred sealing. Archaeologists puzzled over this. Why would a society invest centuries of devotion, crafting enclosures that echoed with spirit and star, only to bury them? Some speculate it was practical, that old temples were covered to make way for new ones. Others wonder if it was ritual, a symbolic act of death, a temple laid to rest like a body returned to the soil. But perhaps the answer lies deeper, in the human heart, in the strange and beautiful instinct we have to preserve what we love by letting it go. Think of a child's blanket folded away in a cedar chest, a letter placed in the sea, a grave covered not with sorrow, but with song. What if Göbekli Tepe wasn't just buried? What if it was honored? Perhaps its builders understood something we've forgotten, that all sacred things have their time. And when that time is done, you do not destroy them. You do not leave them to decay. You return them to the dark, to the silence, to the place where they were born. In many ancient cultures, the most sacred objects were never displayed. They were hidden, kept in caves and chests, in tombs meant not to conceal, but to protect, because mystery thrives in shadow, because memory lasts longer underground. Maybe the people of Göbekli Tepe knew that their work was complete, that the circle had closed, that what had once been open to the stars now belonged to the earth. And so, with devotion, they packed the spaces between the pillars with rubble, not with carelessness, but with ceremony, not to forget, but to preserve. They were not erasing what they had made. They were giving it back, to time, to the ancestors, to the dreaming soil. And in that act, they taught us something profound, that the sacred is not only in building, it is in knowing when to let go. Tonight, let this speak to something within you, the part of you that holds on, the part that fears endings, the part that believes burying means loss. Because sometimes, to bury something is to love it enough to set it free. Let that truth settle like dust. Let it lie over your thoughts like a soft cloth drawn over a sleeping altar. You do not need to carry everything forever. Some things, some moments, some dreams are meant to be returned to the quiet, not as rejection, but as devotion. The stones still sleep beneath the Turkish soil, undisturbed, unchanged, eternal. And in that silence, they are not gone. They are whole. There are places we know by name. Babylon, you are, Jericho, cities that once blazed with firelight and trade, now reduced to broken stone and forgotten echoes. But there are other places not remembered by name, but by feeling, by the way the wind moves across the land, by the shape of a mound under the sun, by the subtle shift in the earth's breath, as if something once sacred still sleeps beneath. Göbekli Tepe is not alone. It was not a singular wonder rising out of nowhere. It is one voice in a choir of stone that stretches across southeastern Anatolia, a constellation of buried memory, each mound a potential verse in the human origin story. We now know there are more sites, many more. Karahan Tepe, discovered just 35 kilometers from Göbekli. Older, deeper, a twin in spirit, yet stranger still. There, a massive T-shaped pillar stands alone in an underground chamber, its head rising from the earth like a priest caught mid-prayer. And around it, phallus-shaped stones, carvings of heads with eyes that never blink. Runes carved into bedrock, as if the very bones of the world were being sculpted into sanctuary. Some call it a sister site, others a missing page in a story too big for a single place. And there is more. Navali Quarry, now drowned beneath a dam's water. Its remains whisper of similar pillars, shorter, yes, but carved with the same hands, the same impulse toward meaning. The same T-shaped forms that defy the idea that Göbekli was a lone miracle. There is Sefer Tepe, Kakmak Tepe, Hamzin Tepe, names spoken only in academic corners. And yet, beneath them, stories no less profound. Sites still sleeping under fields and orchards, waiting for wind, or rain, or a shepherd's foot to stir their dream. What does this mean? It means that Göbekli Tepe was not the first, and not the only. It was part of a network, a landscape of temples, sanctuaries, ritual centers, created by people who did not write, who did not rule, but who felt a call strong enough to carve meaning into stone. This was not civilization in a modern sense. There were no empires, no walls, no cities buzzing with commerce, but there was culture. There was intention. There was a spiritual geography more complex than we dare to imagine. And maybe these places were not forgotten at all. Maybe they were intentionally returned to dust, hidden like seeds. Seeds that could only bloom again when we were ready to understand. And now, as archaeologists gently uncover more and more of this ancient world, the air thickens with mystery. Because for every stone unearthed, 100 more lie beneath. And for every answer found, 1,000 more questions awaken. What if Anatolia was once the spiritual heart of the world? Not just the land of agriculture's birth, but the cradle of myth? A place where hunter-gatherers became dreamers. Not by accident, but by design. What if these mounds, these circles, these sleeping temples were not remnants of a primitive past, but monuments to a wisdom we buried too soon? You see, we think of the past as behind us, gone, over. But sometimes the past is waiting for us to notice, to pause, to remember. And the dust that covers these forgotten cities is not just earth. It is reverence. It is the silence of time holding breath. Tonight, as you lie beneath your own ceiling, a modern roof, far from Anatolia's stone, know that beneath your memory, there are also buried cities. Within your spirit, there are temples untouched by language. And in your dreams, you may walk among them. Step softly. The ground still remembers. Myths do not grow from logic. They grow from longing, from the sacred ache of trying to explain a world that is too vast, too beautiful, too mysterious to bear without story. And like roots from the same ancient tree, these myths, scattered across continents and centuries, begin to echo one another, to mirror, to hum with the same rhythm, as if whispered from a single source, long forgotten, but never quite gone. Tonight, let us follow those echoes. Let us stand beside the stone circles of Göbekli Tepe and listen for the myths that match their shape. Because something in those pillars, those silent, faceless sentinels, feels eerily familiar. Not just ancient, but archetypal. Take, for example, the myth of Eden. A garden, a serpent, a fall from a higher state of consciousness into the physical, into toil, into separation. We find no apple trees at Göbekli Tepe, but we do find serpents, carved in descending motion, coiling downward, as if echoing the same fall. And what came after Göbekli Tepe's burial? The birth of agriculture, of labor, of walls and division and hierarchy. Could it be that this temple was our real Eden? A place of spiritual unity, where human beings lived in communion with sky and stone. Before choosing the path of civilization, it's only a question, but the myth and the memory align too closely to ignore. Now, drift eastward to India, where the Rig Veda speaks of a time before time. A golden age when the gods and humans lived without separation. And then a veil fell. A split occurred. The divine withdrew, leaving behind only symbols, rituals, traces. Is that not what Göbekli Tepe is? A trace, a symbol, a wound in the timeline where the divine once touched the earth and then retreated into the ground, into burial. And from Egypt, the story of the Benben stone, the first point of land to rise from the watery abyss of chaos, the place where creation began, a stone of memory, of emergence. Göbekli Tepe, too, rises from an empty plain, stone lifted into the light, not to dominate, but to remember. And then there is Enki, Sumerian god of water, wisdom, and the subterranean deep. He dwelled not in the sky, but in the Apsu, a watery abyss beneath the world, a realm of memory, mystery, and dream. Enki was a builder, a carver of knowledge into space, a whisperer of sacred plans. He, like the unknown builders of Göbekli Tepe, crafted meaning not to be seen, but to be felt. Even in the Aboriginal dream time, we hear of ancestors walking across the land, singing the world into being, marking it with song lines, traces of energy and story that shaped every stone, every hill, every path. Are the circles of Göbekli Tepe not also song lines in stone? We cannot know, not with certainty. But myth was never about certainty. It was about resonance. And these myths, Eden, Enki, Dreamtime, Benben, they do not explain Göbekli Tepe, but they reflect it, like moonlight on water, like breath on glass. And perhaps that's what this place truly is. A mirror, not of what we were, but of what we once believed we could be. Because every myth is an invitation to see beyond time, to feel beyond knowledge, to remember beyond words. And every stone at Göbekli Tepe is a myth made form, So tonight, rest in that remembering. Let the stories of the world rise in you like mist. Let the serpent guide you down. Let the sacred garden return. Let the first stone reemerge. Because whether we call it Eden or Enki's chamber, the dream time or the Benben peak, what we're searching for is not lost. It is buried. It is waiting. And sometimes it speaks, not in language, but in the curve of a vulture's wing, in the rhythm of a spiral, in the way a stone faces the stars. The myths live on, in you. Not all architecture is made of stone. Some is made of longing. Some is shaped not by chisels, but by memory, by imagination, by the quiet ache of the soul reaching beyond itself. Tonight, we step away from the dust. Just for a moment, we step inward, because as we've wandered through the silence of Göbekli Tepe, its circles, its symbols, its myths carved into the bones of the world, one question begins to echo in the chambers of the heart. Why did they build it? Why did a people without cities, without script, without rulers or roads, gather again and again to raise stone into sacred form? What moved them? The answer may not lie in what they built, but in what they were becoming. Because perhaps the temple was not just made of limestone. Perhaps it was made of transformation, a shared space where humans stopped merely surviving and started dreaming, started making meaning, started reaching toward the eternal. And that impulse, that sacred yearning to carve our wonder into the world, did not vanish with Göbekli Tepe. It still lives. In you. You too are a builder. No, not of temples or monuments in the traditional sense, but of patterns, of beliefs, of inner sanctuaries no one else can see. Yet you return to them again and again. You build with your thoughts, with the way you hold grief, with the way you shape love into gesture, into silence, into presence. The people of Göbekli Tepe built in circles, and so do we. We return to the same memories, the same hopes, the same fears, each time carving them a little more deeply, as if shaping something that might finally hold. And just like those ancient pillars, your life holds symbols. You wear them without noticing. A necklace from a mother, a scar with no name, a favorite number, the sound of a song you always return to. They are your carvings. They are your story. And what if we remembered that building, true building, is not about achievement, but about alignment? What if Göbekli Tepe was less a construction site and more a mirror, a reflection of what it means to gather, to create from awe, to give form to something invisible, simply because it matters? Even their tools were simple. Stone, hand, time. But they built what lasted 12,000 years. So what might you be building now that no one can see? What rituals do you perform each day? Morning coffee, evening walk, a whisper to no one. That could one day be remembered as sacred? The builders of Göbekli Tepe are gone. Their names lost. Their language vanished. But their gesture remains. Their intent lingers like the warmth of a hand on stone. And that intent is still alive. You carry it in the way you reach toward the stars without knowing why, in the way you grieve things that were never yours, in the way you carve meaning from silence. Because before civilization, before cities, before the seed met the soil, we were dreamers, and dreamers are always builders. So tonight, as sleep draws near, ask yourself softly, what is the temple I am building? Brick by breath, day by hidden day. And know this, it does not need to be finished. It only needs to be true. Let that be enough. Let that be sacred. Because the greatest temple ever built was never meant to be seen by the world, but only to be felt by those who remembered how to listen. And you have always known the way back. Not everything dies when the body does. Some beings slip past death like mist. like sound carried by wind, like presence too old to vanish completely. Tonight, we return to the stone sanctuary, but not to the pillars, not even to the carvings. Tonight, we walk among the ghosts, because long before gods had human faces, they had tails, wings, claws, fangs, and at Göbekli Tepe, the divine did not look like us. It ran on 4 legs. It soared on thermal winds. It hissed, it hunted, it howled. It was animal. You could still feel them if you listened closely. Their breath in the stone. Their gaze carved into the monoliths. Foxes curled like flames. Serpents sliding down the spine of time. Vultures hovering at the edge of bone and sky. These were not decorations. They were inhabitants, not to be worshipped from afar, but to be met eye to eye, perhaps even spoken to. In the worldview of the people who carved Göbekli Tepe, animals were not below us. They were not pets, not prey. They were companions in the cosmic order. Each species carried a frequency, each creature a message, and some were gods. We forget this in modern minds. We separate the sacred from the wild. We put temples in cities and keep nature at the edge of concrete. But to the early builders, the opposite was true. The sacred was the wild. The temple was made of fur and fawn and feather. To see a fox was to be reminded of cunning, of agility, of silence with purpose. To dream of a vulture was to feel the soul lifted, watched over by something that knew how to carry the dead. And the serpent, a being of cycles, of shedding, of descent and return. These were not metaphors. They were truth, living, breathing symbols woven into the fabric of experience. And now, they're gone. The foxes have fled the hills. The vultures no longer roost nearby. The snakes no longer coil beneath the stones. But that does not mean they have left, because myth does not require flesh. It requires memory, and in that they still live. Ghosts, yes, but not of fear. Ghosts of connection. Spirits that walk between the visible and the invisible. Not to haunt, but to remind that once the animals were gods, and maybe they still are, because deep down we still know how to feel them. A deer pauses in the forest and we go still, not just in caution, but in reverence. A hawk glides above us and we feel the air open. A wolf howls in the distance, and our bones remember something the brain cannot name. Even your dreams. Notice how often they are filled with animals. Not human voices, but fur, eyes, claws, power without cruelty, wisdom without explanation. That is not coincidence. That is memory, wrapped in symbol, passed down not by word, but by instinct. So tonight, as you rest in this quiet dark, know this: the ghosts of the animal gods are not gone. They are walking the circles of your own inner temple. They are pacing the edges of your wonder. They are curling beside your dreams, not as threats, but as mirrors, to show you what you've always known, that you are not separate from the sacred. You are woven into it, flesh to fur, breath to wing, heart to howl. Listen, even now, they're here. There is a kind of silence that is not empty, but ancient, a hush that hums, a stillness not of absence, but of memory held so deeply it forgets how to speak. Tonight we lie down beside it, because at Göbekli Tepe, the stones do not crumble. They do not speak. They sleep, and in their sleep, they remember. Close your eyes now, if you haven't already. Let your breath soften. Let the world recede. Feel the shape of the earth beneath you. Its slow exhale, its invisible turning. Imagine you're resting among the monoliths. Your body curled beside a pillar older than the first word ever spoken. The stone is cold to the touch. Not cruel, just indifferent in a way only time can be. It has seen everything, and yet it waits, without demand, without judgment. Only presence. Archaeologists measure these pillars by height, by weight, by tool marks. But the soul reads them differently, not as measurements, but as beings in slumber. The T-shapes, with their heavy heads and folded arms, seem not just erected, but laid to rest standing, like guardians fallen into eternal meditation. They face each other like figures in a forgotten ritual, locked in a moment that never ends. What are they dreaming of? Of the fox that used to pass in twilight? Of blood poured into the basin like prayer? Of smoke rising in spirals while chants echoed into the stars? Or are they dreaming of us? Those who came after, those who look but cannot see, those who dig and measure, but forget to feel, because perhaps they sleep not to hide from us, but to wait for the moment when we might return, not with tools, but with reverence. The ancients believed that stone was not dead. It was the oldest living thing, not animated like beasts, but aware like mountains, like rivers, like time. And what is sleep if not a form of knowing? Too deep for words? What if these stones are not forgotten, not abandoned, but resting? And in that rest, they hold the songs of a people who did not write, because they didn't need to. They carved, they buried, they trusted the earth to remember what they could no longer carry. Some nights, the wind moves strangely across the plateau. It curls between the stones, whispers around their curves, and for a moment, it feels like breathing. Not yours, theirs. And if you lie still enough, with your heart quiet, your breath slow, you can almost sense it. The stones are not gone. They are not relics. They're sleeping gods, dreaming the world forward from their ancient rest. And you, in this moment of stillness, have joined them, because sleep, too, is a return, a small burial of the day, a soft surrender into the dark. Let it take you. Let your thoughts fall like dust. Let your bones become weightless. Let your spirit lean into the silence where the oldest stories live. The pillars are still there, still dreaming. And tonight, you dream with them, together. There is a kind of devotion that does not cry out. It whispers, patiently, stone after stone, cut after cut. Tonight, we kneel beside it, because while the mystery of Göbekli Tepe stirs the stars and summons myth, it was made, like all sacred things, by hands, calloused, worn, steady, not divine, human. And this part of the story is often forgotten. In the awe of the architecture, in the symbol-heavy carvings and cosmic alignments, we forget the most intimate truth of all, that somewhere 12,000 years ago, someone knelt in the dust and carved, with no steel, no machines, only stone on stone, only will, only vision. Close your eyes and go there now. The air is dry, the sky a pale expanse above the plateau. You hear the soft, grating rhythm of flint against limestone, a rasp that repeats endlessly, a sacred heartbeat, not of the gods, but of the maker, a young man perhaps, or a woman with a deep scar across her palm. We do not know, but we can imagine. They sit in the shade of half-raised pillars, dust clinging to sweat, shaping a fox, its back arched just so, its tail tucked into a curve only memory could recall. This was not random art. It was memory translated by fingers. It was vision pulled slowly from stone. And it was not quick. To carve a figure in low relief, using only hand tools and endurance, would have taken days, weeks, perhaps longer. There was no rush, because time at Göbekli Tepe did not behave the way it does now. It did not march. It circled, and the carving was not task. It was ritual. To shape the animal was to speak with it. To carve the serpent was to honor it. To draw it from the invisible into the tangible. Each stroke was an offering, a form of prayer not spoken, but performed. And this act of carving was not left to a priestly elite. There were no pharaohs here, no emperors, only a people, a shared rhythm, a sacred collaboration, because you cannot raise 20-ton stones alone, and you cannot carve them into meaning without a culture that knows how to hold silence together. There was a rhythm to their days, a song perhaps never written down, but remembered by the body, a cadence passed from hand to hand, generation to generation, stone to spirit. Even now, you can almost feel it in your fingertips. That ache, that precision, that knowing that what you shape will outlast you. So you shape it well. This is not a forgotten skill. It is only buried. You carve too every day, in your own way. The words you choose, the silences you keep, the things you make when no one is looking. You do not carve stone, but you carve time. You leave your imprint in gestures, in a way you love, in a way you rise again and again. Without being asked, the people of Göbekli Tepe did not leave names, but they left form, they left intention, and that has endured. So tonight, rest your hands. Let them remember that they come from builders, not of empires, but of meaning. You do not need to move mountains. Only carve with care, whatever that means for you. Let that be enough. Let it be sacred, because time does not forget what is carved with love. Beneath every field, beneath every road and river, there is breath, not the kind drawn through lungs, but a breath of memory, of pressure, of silence so full it trembles. And tonight, as you lie still in the folds of your blanket, we descend, not into darkness, but into that living hush beneath the ground. Because Göbekli Tepe is not a monument that rises. It is a secret that sinks. A temple built not to pierce the heavens, but to pull you inward. Even now, it rests beneath a layer of earth, covered not by accident, but by devotion, as we've whispered before. And within that burial, there is not death, but a kind of sleep, a kind of breathing. Imagine it now. You are walking over the plateau, under the weightless sky. There is wind, dry and warm, and the smell of grass gone to seed. To your eyes, it is nothing more than a hill. But you pause, you listen, and somewhere beneath your feet, you feel a thrum. Faint, steady, not of machines, not of geology, but of memory, because the earth remembers. It does not forget what we bury with care, what we tuck in our body not in fear, but in faith. And beneath this hill, this navel of stone, there is breath, not exhaled, but held. It waits, and that waiting has weight. For millennia, the sanctuary remained hidden, covered in dust and goat tracks, unseen by kings, untouched by empires. And yet, it breathed, not in time, but in presence. Somewhere inside the earth, the stones stood in their circles. The vultures rested in limestone wings. The foxes curled their carved bodies against time's forgetting. And they breathed. They held the stories of those who came before, who sang without words, who offered blood and bread, not for reward, but for remembrance. In many ancient traditions, the earth is not seen as passive. She is not a stage. She is a being. The Sumerians called her Ki, the Greeks Gaia. To the Hopi, she is Spider-Woman, weaving all life beneath her crust. And in every myth, she listens. What is placed within her, bodies, bones, seeds, stone, does not disappear. It becomes. And perhaps Göbekli Tepe, in its long burial, was not put to sleep, but to gestate, to ripen like myth, to rest like truth that has not yet found its voice. Until one day, when the earth cracked open again, and a shepherd's foot struck the edge of something too symmetrical, too ancient to be ordinary, and so we unearthed it, gently, carefully, but still we forget to listen. We measure the walls, we catalog the carvings, but we forget that this place still breathes, not with air, but with the breath of intention and breath. As every mystic knows, is the first bridge between spirit and form. It is what separates the living from the lifeless. It is the beginning of song, of speech, of prayer. So perhaps Göbekli Tepe is not just old stone. It is held breath. And tonight you can join it, in the dark behind your eyes, in a quiet cave of your chest. You can match your breath to that rhythm. Slow, low, ancient. You can remember that the deepest truths are not shouted, but buried, and that to find them, you must go inward, downward, into the sacred soil of your own remembering. Breathe. There is no need to dig, only to feel. The breath beneath the earth is still there. It always was, and tonight, it breathes with you. Everything sacred moves in circles. The planets, the seasons, the womb, the breath. In Göbekli Tepe, forgotten by history, remembered by stone, was shaped by this ancient rhythm. Not by walls or towers, but by the circle. Tonight, let us step back inside it. Not just with feet, but with spirit. Because to walk into a circle is to walk into something primordial. A shape older than empire, older than thought. A shape that whispers the one truth we have always feared and always known. You will return. The enclosures of Göbekli Tepe, as we've wandered through them together, are not rooms. They are vessels. No corners, no throne, no hierarchy, only flow. And in the center, always two pillars, not as rulers, but as balance. Opposites made still, yin and yang before language, sun and moon before calendars, masculine and feminine before gender had weight. The circle contains them. The outer stones face inward, like witnesses to an eternal embrace. No one turns their back. No one stands outside. This was not built for division. This was built for remembrance. Because in a circle, there is no end. No arrival, only movement and return. And perhaps this was the lesson the builders tried to give us. Not in words, but in shape. That life is not a ladder, not a staircase, not a conquest towards something greater. It is a spiral, a sacred return, a re-entering of self from deeper places each time. We come back again and again, to grief, to love, to wonder, not because we are lost, but because the journey inward always curves. Even time, they say, may not be linear. The universe itself expands and spirals. DNA twists in a double helix. Galaxies turn. Blood flows in loops. Stories and only to begin again. And so the circle at Göbekli Tepe is not just a structure. It is a reminder that the sacred is not found at the peak. It is found at the center, and that center lives in you. So ask yourself now, gently, quietly, what am I circling back to? What truth do I keep meeting again and again? Each time with new eyes? What grief has spiraled through me not to wound, but to deepen? What joy keeps finding me when I thought I had closed all the doors? That is the wisdom of the circle. It teaches us that nothing is lost, only returned, buried, remembered, reborn. Even Göbekli Tepe itself was hidden in a circle of soil, covered, not to be forgotten, but to wait, to complete its own spiral of silence and discovery. And now, here we are, you resting, me speaking, us circling this truth together, that the end is never final, that the sacred path always turns inward again, that all that matters, love, meaning, beauty, mystery, comes not in lines, but in loops. So let go now. Let your breath become circular. Let your thoughts coil softly into quiet. You do not need to solve anything, only to return. Again and again, the stones still hold their shape, and the circle still opens. Not behind you, not ahead, but here, now, within, and you're always welcome inside it. There is a wind that does not blow leaves. It stirs memory. It carries no scent, only a strange familiarity, as though someone has spoken your name, without lips, without sound, from the other side of time. Tonight, we walk with that wind, because Göbekli Tepe is not just stone. It is invocation. And if you listen, not with ears, but with presence, you will hear it. Not language, not message, but a gentle recognition. I remember you. There are places in the world where the veil is thinner, where the invisible brushes the visible, not with grandeur, but with a hush. Göbekli Tepe is one of those places, high on a barren hill, far from cities, far from noise, where nothing seems to grow, except wonder. And in that emptiness, a wind moves. It circles the carved enclosures. It slips between the pillars like a thought not yet formed. It plays across the dust like fingers across strings. And somehow it knows you, not as you are now, with phone in hand and calendar full, but as you once were, or as you've always been, beneath all the masks, beneath the stories you tell even yourself. The wind that moves across Göbekli Tepe does not care for what you've done. It does not measure. It does not compare. It simply recognizes the soul that remembers to listen. Because long ago, others stood where you now imagine yourself. They stood in animal skins and silence. They built not for glory, but for return. And the wind whispered then, too, over the circles, through the firelight, across sleeping bodies and freshly carved stone. It sang names that were never written down. It touched shoulders that never made it into history. It carried the warmth of breath from one heart to another and moved on. It still does. And when you come close to a place like this, you don't visit as a tourist. You visit as a descendant. Because the wind does not see centuries. It sees soul prints. It sees resonance. It sees return. And in the soft hour of sleep, when your mind begins to unlace its edges, the wind remembers you. It curls beside your ear. It touches your chest. It says, you've been here before. Maybe not in this body. Maybe not in this name. But in essence, in longing, in wonder, in the aching need to build something sacred, and then walk away because the circle is complete. The wind at Göbekli Tepe is not wild. It is not cruel. It does not tear. It gathers. It collects whispers. It carries prayers never spoken aloud. It remembers songs that no voice now knows. And when it brushes your cheek, in dream or in waking, know that it brings more than air. It brings recognition that you're not separate, not outside, not after. You are part of the same spiral, the same dream, the same great remembering. You are not forgotten, not by the stone, not by the sky, not by the wind. And when it calls your name, you will not hear it in words. You will feel it, like warmth where there is no sun, like knowing without reason, like peace you didn't earn, but always carried. So rest now. The wind knows where to find you. It has your name written in dust, in breath, in stone, and it will return, again and again, as all sacred things do. Some stories do not end. They become quiet, like embers glowing beneath ash, like breath slowing before sleep, like stones waiting to speak again. And now, after all the nights we've wandered, through dust and symbol, through dream and burial, through circle and silence, we have arrived where we began, in the presence of the stones, not as ruins, not as puzzles, but as witnesses, because Göbekli Tepe is not a monument to something lost. It is a memory that chose to stay. 12,000 years ago, someone placed their hand on limestone. Someone cut a line, shaped a tail, etched a vulture in mid-flight, not because they needed shelter, but because they had seen something that could not be held in words. So they gave it to stone, and the stone held it. It held the weight of longing, the echo of ritual, The hum of meaning passed through generations, not by language, but by gesture. The builders are gone. Their bones return to earth. Their names blown from the hills like dust. But the stones, they remain, and they remember. They remember the hands that carved them, the feet that circled them, the firelight that flickered across their ancient forms. They remember the grief that was left in silence, the joy that rose in shared breath, the awe that comes when humans realize they are not separate from the stars. These are not stones of fact. They're stones of feeling. You cannot extract a meaning from them like a code. You can only stand with them, sit beside them, close your eyes, and feel what they carry. Because these stones knew how to speak, not with sound, but with shape, with presence, with placement. They spoke of balance, of sky, of sacrifice, of the beauty of giving something to time, without asking for anything back. And now, they speak to you, not loudly, not clearly, but they do. They speak in the way your body softens when you hear truth. They speak in the way your chest lifts when you step into mystery. They speak in the way your dreams remember what your waking mind forgets. That you too are part of this story, not because you understand the past, but because you carry the same need to shape the invisible into something real. You don't need to carve stone. You don't need to gather in sacred circles. You only need to listen, and then to remember what you heard. Because the greatest temples are not always made of stone. Some are made of attention, of breath, of stillness. And you are in one now. You are the witness. You are the builder. You are the dreamer the stones were waiting for. So sleep now, not in forgetting, but in belonging. You are not on the outside of this story. You are within it. You always were. And long after this moment fades, after the lights are off and the night has settled, the stones will still be there, still standing, still waiting, still speaking, not to your ears, but to your spirit. And your spirit will answer in its own quiet way, because the stones that knew how to speak were never just stones. They were always you.